I said, if no one volunteers, can we take the next hour off?
No, you're not. Come on. I spend all this time working on slides. I will just start picking people. So yeah, don't you worry. I'll. Frantically searching for people who are not going to be 100% involved in the discussion. Okay, we have voluntold person. Thank you, Bron. Right, let's get started. So this is Email Core, the session you were very excited to attend, the highlight of your IETF week, etc., etc. So I'm Alexei, and you see Todd. You should be familiar with Notewell. I would be very impressed if you don't, but if you don't, please read relevant documents before participating. So we have note taker. If you're in Mitaco, you're in the right place. Quickly, this is the proposed agenda. This is most, but not all of the tickets discussed recently. And let's get started. So we are going to start with better definition for trace header fields, outstanding issues. We'll start with email format first, and then we'll talk about how it relates to SMTP. Then we'll go through various SMTP related issues, and there will be some applicability statement document related stuff at the end. Any agenda bashing?
It would be really good if it could be made the slide could be made bigger, because I can't read it.
Is this better?
You really need to do is like the window's too small or something. I don't know what's going
on. I'm not sure I can make window bigger, to be honest.
Needs to be at least 100%. For safety, for some people, it actually should be up around 120 or 40%.
See, if I increase it to 100%, I don't think you'll actually see the whole slide. See, it will be truncated at the...
It's weird that your window is taking such a small part of the screen.
Let me try something else.
Maybe basically taking about a third of the vertical space that's available.
Yeah,
I
Alexi,
know.
if you make your window less wide, it might fill up the space better.
I'm just mapping. I'm just projecting one of the Chrome tabs. So how do I? Okay, let me try something else. Share slides.
Well, that looks much better already.
All right. Oh, that's a nice trick. Okay. Fine. Is this better? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Excellent.
So this is actually a new Miteco feature for sharing slides preloaded. So nice to know that it's actually useful. Right. So any agenda bashing? Hearing nothing, let's start with trace header fields, round 2. So yeah, just to remind people, there is a definition of trace header fields, which is received and return path, but also includes some other header fields defined in other RFCs over time. So I think we agree that the definition needs to be slightly more inclusive, at least be extensible. I think we pretty much settled on the textual changes. The only thing remaining is a couple of eBNF issues in the format document, and then there are some textual changes in SMTP. So coming back to that, we did try to get resolution on lone return path last time. But I think there was still a discussion whether it's possible, whether it's happened in real world, whether like firewalls can strip received header fields and just leave lone return path in messages, and do we care? So comments, please. Okay.
I mean, it's not just the stripping case, which I guess we may be less sympathetic for. But there's also the case of when you're when you're doing composition of a message, it's sort of a natural thing to use return path to indicate the mail from, and you're certainly not going to have receive fields at that point.
Okay, so you're saying that some email clients are using it for mail from.
Sure, what your point is. Try clarifying.
To construct messages that have a return path and field and no receive fields for various purposes.
Okay, that's interesting use case. Dave?
Hi there. Simply put, requirements seem to be, to me, to be something that should be there when things won't work if they're not there. I don't see any reason to impose requirements here that aren't essential to the operation of the system. So having what I think you're calling a lone return path, which is to say no received fields, seems just fine to me.
Mm-hmm.
Right, so I think maybe if I can try to rephrase it, no system will enforce this requirement, so things shouldn't break if observed in the wild. Barry?
Putting it more operationally than I thought I had, but you're probably right anyhow.
Okay, all right. Barry?
Yeah, agreeing with Dave.
I'm suggesting that there is no protocol requirement here that email won't work unless there's a receive field present. There's all sorts of operational reasons we would want received fields, but that's a completely different issue than making it mandatory to the protocol.
Okay, sounds good. Barry?
Yeah. Completely agreeing with Dave. People will put in receive fields or not, will strip receive fields or not. We should say nothing about that. We should just say what receive fields are and how they're used, and that's sufficient.
Okay, Pete?
Victor's been in queue for quite some time. I guess he dropped
He
out.
already talked.
Okay.
I didn't.
Okay.
Sorry,
I didn't.
Victor, did you want
Yeah.
to say something again? Please go on then. And then we'll continue with Pete.
Lone return path is okay. I agree.
All right, thank you. Pete?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that the absence or presence of receive field isn't the question. It's whether you can have a return path with no receive fields. I think Ned has made a reasonable case that you could come up with a reason to do that. The initial thought was, well, if you've got a return path, then it must mean that it traversed something because it's coming from the mail from in the SMTP stream. But Ned's claiming it's a perfectly reasonable use to use return path for something other than that. So if people are okay with that justification, I think that's reasonable. But it's not about the presence or not presence of received in general, because of course that's always been permitted to be left out.
Right, and so Dave and I have both said that there's no connection between receive fields and return path. Receive fields are or they aren't.
All right, John?
Definitions and statements about when those fields are inserted in 5321 this at all. I don't think it does, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think it's a SMTP issue describing when they're inserted. So I think that's fine, even if ABNF is relaxed in the format. All right, I think unless there are other comments, I think we finally have conclusion on this one, which is I'm glad to hear. So next slide. Well, basically text needs to be updated based on this.
Yep, I've got enough to go on from that.
Yeah, we'll just do that. So the only other remaining issue is whether trace block can be separated from resent block by optional fields. This is the current ABNF. It basically allows this. Comments, please. Barry?
What's my thought on the trace header fields in a particular group of trace header fields, like received, are ordered, but the intermixing of other fields or the order they appear in with respect to other fields is irrelevant. So yeah, this is fine.
I personally tend to think that that's okay as well. There is no reason to restrict this, and I don't think anybody will enforce checking that if trace exists, then resent block exists, then they have to follow each other. I don't think implementations will check that. So unless there are any objections, basically, I think the current ABNF is fine in this respect. So let's move on.
Yeah, my plan will be just to publish that, and you can use what's in the doc as sort of a, check on the list that we got this right, if that's
Sounds
okay
good.
with everybody.
Yep.
All right.
Victor?
Just for the record, I think postfix adds resent from at the bottom of the header block, so it doesn't appear in the order in which the grammar shows it. Resent has other ordinary headers above it because it gets added at the bottom, for better or worse. Never caused a problem.
Syntactically, that's not a problem because, of course, it's any amount of resent and then the rest of the headers and then resent and then the rest of the headers. So you can keep going in circles and end up with resent at the bottom. So syntactically, that's not it. There's nothing wrong with that. So I think we're good.
All right, sounds good. So moving on to the SMTP spec itself, I did a scan of the document where everywhere where like trace information or trace header is mentioned as well as received. And over 3 slides, I'm proposing some changes. I think they're relatively minor. One thing that the document implies that the trace header fields is can include other header fields, but it only defines received. So basically, I suggest that the current definition in section 4.4 is moved to a subsection, and there is an introductory definition of a trace header fields. I found this text from RFC 822, which you can see on the screen. I mean, we can improve on this, but I think it's probably pretty close to what we want to have. Then the second section, in section 2.3.10, there is first reference to trace information. I suggest adding reference to the newly defined section 4.4, which defines trace information. Any comments? Any objections to this change then? John?
Objection, but for planning and meeting running purposes, you should assume that I cannot read the fine print on any of these slides. It's my issue rather than a more general one, but I'm having eyesight problems, and the combination of those with the fine print, even when I bring the slide up full screen with Meet Echo, is such that I'm going to have to take people's words for it and then pick the slides up later and try to add it in.
Yeah, to be fair, I think I sent exactly the same sort of suggestions in email last week, so you can.
Yeah, in that case, it's already in the working version of the document as a comment. I just have to uncomment it.
All right, thank you. Dave?
So this is a continuation of a concern I've been raising for a long time. Section 2.3.10 here is using terminology that isn't all that well defined or is outside the scope of SMTP. Gatewaying is completely outside of SMTP. And the originator and delivery part of it is at best incomplete.
Okay, but I think that's a separate ticket, basically. John? John, I couldn't hear you. I can see you, but I couldn't hear you now. Yeah.
Sorry. I was just going to say, if you're ruling this a separate issue, which is fine, I will make whatever comments when I have when and if we get to it. But I disagree with Dave. I disagree with Dave's analysis.
Tuesday doesn't see gateway in the proposed text. I'm looking at what you're displaying on 2310. I see the word gateway.
The decision to include that here, Dave, was an explicit decision in drums, and if my memory serves me correctly, discussed again in YAM. And we can have the discussion again, of course. But I don't think the issues are nearly as cut and dried as your portrayal.
Okay, moving on. Oh, sorry. Apologies. Right, so in section 363, there is a mention that received header field can be inserted. I suggest adding and possibly other trace header fields here. And in section 7.6 about information disclosure, again, it talks about that the received header field can disclose public information about hosts and stuff, but other trace header fields can also potentially do that. So I suggest add, for example, received, but that's sort of a minor thing, really. Any comments, any objections? Okay, so Ned wrote in chat saying that the changes seems fine to him. Barry +1. All right, sounds good. Moving on to the next issue. So this is ticket number 20 about removal of send, SAML, and SOML. Basically, they only mention an appendix now, and Ned suggested I believe, yes, Ned suggested would you write explaining that
I think that Alessandro's
yeah,
change is a good one.
Sorry, you're a bit not very loud. Can you say it again?
He said Alessandro's proposed change is a good one, and I agree with him.
Fine. Yeah. Okay, sounds good. Right, moving on to the next ticket, ticket number 14. Todd, do you want to take over?
Sure. The question that was put forth in ticket 14 was basically asking whether or not the text specifying each of the sizes in the in RC 5321 was sufficient or not. There was no the ticket didn't invite a discussion on whether or not these size limits should be changed, but I do know that the list raised that issue on a couple of the size limits and said, no, we can't change the size limits, which is fine because there was no request to change the size limits. So the question here is really, is the text sufficient, or do we need more text discussing these size limits?
Would anybody like to comment about changing, in favor of changing size limits? Any one of them?
The question is the size limits. I think the question is the text that's in there, and I think the text is fine. I don't think we need any changes at all.
Anyone else?
Speaking personally, I think there is no need to change any of this, so I would be quite happy for this to be closed with no change.
And this ticket.
Okay, moving on. Right, extension keywords starting with.
Like, who opened that ticket? The previous one.
It was based on notes from John's document.
Okay. Okay, I guess we're done. Thanks.
Yeah. So extension keywords starting with X. We had some discussion on the mailing list. I think pretty much everybody agrees that it's a good idea to not make them special. So there is a proposal over a few slides what to do. So the first change in, I did it in reverse order in the document. So this is IANA consideration at the back of the document, just basically delete requirements that only extensions not starting with X can be registered.
Yeah, we've completely deprecated the whole X thing, so yeah.
Right, then moving on to the next is there is a section about private use commands. I propose to drop the whole section because, well, it seems to say, it says that if command is not recognized, that you return command not recognized, which is already mentioned elsewhere. And I think the rest of the text is basically I think this section should be eliminated. Any objections?
Queries in the queue.
Okay. Sorry, John, say it again.
I said the editor is quietly applauding. You should get rid of both the section of the previous one.
Murray?
I'm just curious, is it worth citing, if there's going to be a change log or something, should we cite that this was removed because of that BCP?
I think there is a change log at the in one of the appendices.
Yeah, okay. I was just thinking out loud, really. Thanks.
All right. And then moving on, the last change in this set. This is section 222, definition and registration of extensions. I think pretty much most of the text goes away. There is a related change, which we discussed on the mailing list about extensions, changing from extensions must be registered unless they start with X. To extended should be registered. And so now the implication basically is that well-known extensions like xclient can be registered as well. Related to this, the current text only allows registrations in ISG-approved standard track and experimental documents. What people think about allowing ISG-approved informational? So the use case I have in mind is something like xclient is not really experimental. Dave?
General discussion that's been happening regularly about registries and what the criteria for registration should be. And there's a natural tendency to want to be strict because of quality control, but IETF approval is where quality control is supposed to happen. And the real goal of a registry is to make sure there aren't name collisions and maybe to worry about allocating a scarce resource, which doesn't apply in this case. Consequently, I'm not sure why the rule shouldn't in fact be quite a bit more permissive.
So you're suggesting maybe removing ISG approved and allowing other types of RFCs, like independent stream, for example. Ned?
You know, I would add to Dave's list of important things that registries do to, you know, enable people to document existing practice, especially widespread existing practice, without having to go through our processes. I would dearly love, for example, the example I give on the mailing list is the, you know, the Microsoft stuff that's used authorized clients in, you know, in S&P auth and IMAP auth. Someone else came up with an example that I can't remember offhand of why this is important for, you know, SMTP extensions as well. I'd rather capture data in some form, and you know, if you want to make the registry, you know, have different criteria levels like we do for, you know, for you know, media types, great. You can do it that way and have, you know, have the better set of extensions, but I think more information is almost always better.
So I think you're basically saying that we should allow informational and remove ISG approved. So basically allowing all type of RFCs. Dave?
Issue. And I can imagine situations where it's just fine to have no specification available. It certainly is something we ought to always provide for, and then the question is whether to require it. And I hadn't thought of not requiring a specification, so that's where the apology comes in. And not just IETF specification, any specification would seem to me to be sufficient to handle the point that Ned's making.
Okay, John?
Part of the point I was going to make. We're sliding rapidly toward register whatever you want to and point to a specification somewhere if you feel like it. And on the theory that we're better off with whatever information we can get than no information at all, yes, I'm in favor of that, but it's a fairly major departure.
All right. Barry?
In the chat is we've successfully used FCFS with specifications strongly encouraged. And I think the way we wrote that in the specs was we wrote it as FCFS, but we put in the template, in the registration template, a specification pointer. And we have no vetting of the specification pointer. There's no expert review of the specification. It's just that we are asking people to provide a specification somewhere, and it's worked. And I think we should do something like that.
All right. So I think there is definitely some form of consensus in the room to relax restrictions. So maybe we should wordsmith this on the mailing list, and Barry's proposal seems interesting. John?
I was just about to say that this is an area in which if somebody wants to volunteer text, it would be helpful. Wordsmithing on the mailing list and find a way to accomplish that.
Okay. Barry, can I volunteer you to write a text?
I beat you to it. I just said I'll do text.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. Moving on. So, ticket number 30, Todd.
Yes, ticket 30 has proposed that there be removal of the reference to SPF and DKIM in this particular section, this last paragraph in section 3.6.2. There was list discussion that seemed to land on just a simple 2-sentence paragraph, which shows there this specification does not deal with verification of return path for use in delivery notifications. It's outside the scope of the specification. Two questions. One, is the proposed text acceptable? And two, there was some mention of perhaps removing the phrase for use in delivery notifications from that proposed paragraph. So we'd just say the specification doesn't deal with verification of the return path, and verification of return path is outside the scope of this specification, which I guess if we remove that phrase, that ends up with 2 redundant sentences. But anyway, Barry.
We should make this change. The text that's there is not quite right, and fixing it is not worth it.
I'm not quite following what you said there. Could you help me understand better, please?
Well, the text, the ascertaining that an address is valid has nothing to do with DKIM. That's an SPF thing. So the text there is not quite right. Okay. And we could fix it by expanding the text, but I don't think that's worth it. I think the right answer is to do the change that's suggested.
Okay, thank you. That helps me better understand things. Victor.
I also agree that it should be just trimmed. Your point on the redundant sentence is probably right. Maybe the second can also be deleted. It seems unnecessary.
Okay. We have in the chat a suggestion to drop the first sentence and just say verification of the return path is outside the scope of the specification.
That's also fine. One or the other.
Yeah, right. Barry? No? I saw you in queue. Okay. All right, so we will go with just...
I don't get removed from the queue automatically. I have to remember to remove myself. Sorry.
We're all dealing with software issues, but so we'll go with just verification of the return path is outside the scope of the specification to replace the last paragraph in section 3.6.2, and I'll note that in the ticket.
Yeah, John said in the chat that he's already dealing with this. Watch for the next draft.
Okay. And then ticket 19. There is a proposal to strike an entire paragraph from section 4.14. I'm not going to read it to you. You all hopefully can read it. It's on the screen. And just replace it with the sentence that says an SMTP server may verify that the domain name argument in the LO command has an address record matching the IP address of the client, and then have further discussion about the topic in the applicability statement rather than having it in RFC 5321 bis. Ned.
little concerned that, you say we're going to do verification. What does that, what does that actually mean? Unless you explain.
Well, the proposed sentence says it may verify that the domain name argument has an address record matching the IP address of the client.
Okay, and now what? But the problem is, okay, so you verify it. Now you've got this Boolean. What are you supposed to? It's sort of. What are you supposed to do with the information that you just got? It's kind of like it's dangling.
The proposal is to discuss what to do with it in the applicability statement. I'm hearing from you that
Why
you
don't
would
we
rather
move the
have.
whole? Why don't we move the whole thing to the applicability statement?
Okay, that's something we can discuss. Victor?
On this topic, one of the things that one can do with the Boolean is log it and/or record its value in trace headers as a comment, which can be useful forensically, even if one doesn't refuse the connection. And in fact, it's mostly the sound thing to do, because rejecting on that basis is in practice, as I'm seeing on, when answering user questions on the postfix list and so on, is really too fragile to be a generally useful policy without other signals that the message is, worthy of rejection. And so the idea is that mostly this is just evidence one might record. And so commenting that this is not a good basis for rejecting could be in scope, but maybe in applicability rather than the main standard. I don't have a strong opinion about that. But it's probably a good idea not to encourage people to block on that basis. If we just leave the first part about saying may verify and then don't discourage blocking, it may be too strong an inducement to do the wrong thing.
Okay. Dave?
Maybe applicability statements are more useful than I realize, but my impression is they often suffer from less attention by implementers than we intend. I quite like the proposed text in the protocol, if only as a flag about an issue that an implementer might want to think about. And once they start thinking about it, they might want to then start asking questions like what to do with it. And maybe that will get them to pay attention to the applicability statement. Wishful thinking on my part.
Okay. Barry?
I understand Dave's issue there. So I think the right answer is the applicability statement does a formal update of the base spec. So there's a forward pointer created by that. And we keep the base spec to the protocol and not put this kind of advice into the base spec. But I agree that Dave's comment is valid, that people often don't pay attention to applicability statements and related stuff like that. So making sure there's a forward pointer is important.
Okay, so we want to effectively move the entire paragraph under discussion here to the applicability statement, but have a pointer left behind in the specification saying, hey, go look at the applicability statement. John?
We can think about an alternative to that, given that update information gets lost. Nothing prevents us from putting a forward pointer here, the applicability statement, as in using the proposed short text and indicating this stuff is discussed in more detail in that forthcoming document. I would lose no sleep over finishing this and having to go into our C editor hold until the applicability statement is finished. It's not as if we're fighting a deadline here. And that kind of forward reference, just think of the back one, is much more clear and much more likely to be picked up than simply using the applicability statement to update this document.
Okay. Victor?
If the text, Right.
Of course, we better be sure that we're going to do the applicability statement.
Right. The text that I'm seeing here covers only half of the story. It gives the server operator kind of the leeway to do the rejecting, and thereby warns senders that they should make every effort to make sure that their hello name does have an IP address, else they might be rejected by some servers. But it doesn't give anybody the impression that actually doing the rejecting is likely to run into a bunch of trouble and should not be undertaken lightly. And it might also give people a hammer to say, well, the RFC says, I can do it, therefore it's your fault, whatever, you're a bad person for not having a valid ELO name. And maybe to some extent that's true, but I think there should be some disincentive to adopting reject on bad ELO as a standard practice. I think it should be some discouragement from that in the text, even if you're allowed to do it under various circumstances.
Right.
All right. Can I ask you to suggest some text on the mailing list?
Okay.
Alessandro? I'm not hearing you speak, Ali.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
It says the server must not refuse that old sentence written there. People believe that the hello name can be anything. Is not a relevant platform.
I'm sorry, Ali. I can hear you, but you're very muffled.
The text must be careful, I think, to re-evaluate, to put value in the hero name, because that old saying that the server must not refuse made people think it is anything. It is just random values, not important, not an important information. Instead, it is not. The servers choose carefully their hello name, and
Right.
it is important. It is an important piece of data.
Well, we're going to have proposed text posted to the list, so we can you can contribute to that discussion then to make sure that your concerns are addressed, if that works for you.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else on this topic? Okay. I look forward to further discussion on the list on this text.
Right, moving on to this is actually the last slide. We had a brief discussion that on the mailing list that it would be good for the applicability statement to mention that top-level domains are not going to be very interoperable. We didn't quite get around to discussing specific text, but I think there is a broad agreement, and we just sort of need to wordsmith this. Comments, John?
Let's see. Is my mic working?
Yep.
Oh, good. Yeah, I seem to be the expert on this topic since Paul and I have been doing this for a couple of years. I would go stronger. I would make it stronger than saying not interoperable. I mean, TLDs have never worked in mail, And even though there are a bunch of sort of people who do it sort of as a gimmick for CCTLDs, in practice, most of them don't work. So yeah, I guess I'm just agreeing that, but I would like to make it stronger that like it should say it's stronger than saying not necessarily interoperable. It's just like you shouldn't do it, and you shouldn't do it, and you shouldn't expect it to work. And I realize there are people who do single component names as as a local alias and stuff, but people do all sorts of local extensions. I don't see any reason to document that.
John, can I ask you to suggest some text?
Oh, sure.
Thank you. Victor?
Agreeing, right. User at CCTLD is not going to go anywhere. And likewise, on local networks disconnected from the internet, lots of people do short names. They get punished later when they connect to the real internet and things don't work right, but it's their choice.
Okay, thank you. Dave?
First of all, I'm not disagreeing with anything that anybody has said so far. John's point and the things being posted all make sense to me. And we're talking about for the AAS rather than the protocol spec. Having the AAS discuss the issue enough to note the problems is probably the right direction to go. The reason it's worth going into some detail about, I think, is because it's a constant issue. Certainly there's people over in the world of ICANN who, not necessarily at ICANN, who keep hoping to have their top level domain get used directly in this way. And so having the AAS at least flag this issue and its history enough to scare people might be useful.
Sounds good. John?
There have been a couple of requests to ICANN to put A records at the top, like Google wanted to do it for .search, and the answer was no, absolutely not, forget it. So in every ICANN contracted domains all specifically say no MX or A at the top. So the only place this will ever occur is in a CCTLD, where of course they will do whatever they want. It's like .ws does it because they want the money, and .ai does it because they host basically because it's cute. So I don't actually see, I'm not disagreeing with you, but I don't see this as an actual problem to be solved because, the few times it's come up, the answer has been, don't be silly. And that was that.
Okay. And with that, and if people don't have any further questions, we at the end of my slides. Any other business people want to bring up very quickly? I just want to mention that the discussion about the extra IANA registry that with John, Ned, and Dave commenting, I will get to this tomorrow, hopefully, or later this week. So yeah, I will post clarifications. We probably need to restart the consensus call because I didn't give enough context for what the registry was all about. John?
Just to make certain we're in sync, my plan right now is to wait until you make that registry consensus call, wait until the minutes come out and I can shuffle through this discussion, and then try to generate a new version of 5321 BIS so we can start working on more specific text. That obviously will not be this week if you're going to not make that consensus call and start that consensus call until sometime later this week. But I would hope it would be in the first half of August.
Yeah, I think doing something in a couple of weeks or 3 weeks would be great.
It it would be really nice to preserve the momentum of the last couple of weeks in this meeting rather than doing what we have done accidentally in the past, which is going silent and then bringing things back up again within a couple of weeks of the meeting.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I think this was quite productive.
For each section in the notes. So hopefully you've got most of what you need to go from there when the minutes come out.
All right, with that, you're getting 5 minutes back from this session. Thank you very much for attending. Thank you for making it very productive. I think I know that some of this stuff is rather tedious, but we made very good progress. So as John said, let's keep momentum going. Thank you all.